Hello, guys, and welcome to this week's episode of Crooked Illness. As you guys can see, we are going to be diving into a story on mental health turned film today. I'm very excited to have Jaime Bennington, son of the late Chester Bennington, here with me to get into the meaning behind today's episode title. Jaime is a writer, director, visual artist, and the man behind the short film A Chant, which gives a powerful insight into the life and mind of someone living with paranoid schizophrenia. I'm very excited to have Jaime here with us to share his story and all the incredible work he has done and is currently doing for the world of mental health. So without further ado, welcome Jaime to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, very excited to have you here today. And I'm so glad that my friend Amanda Webster connected the two of us. She is incredible. You guys, I had her on a podcast episode. Amanda came on, shared her story. She connected Jaime and I through email. We had an incredible phone call. He told me, everything that we're going to be getting into this episode today, which I'm excited to dive right into. But before we go ahead and do that, I would love for you to tell us more about your story.
Um, First of all, I think Amanda deserves two shout outs.
Yes,
So
yes.
Amanda's really, really cool, and I love her lots. But my story is quite it's kind of like an epic, there's a lot of
Yeah.
twists and turns, a lot of
Oh
things
yeah.
going on. But yes, my father was Chester Bennington, and I had an interesting run-in with mental illness and mental health from a very young age. So I personally have dealt with mental illness in all avenues of my family, and including in myself. And I didn't even realize until I was 23, and I stumbled across it, that I dealt with undiagnosed borderline personality disorder. And I was one of those people that just thought panic attacks every day for 23 years is a total normal happening, only to find out that that was absolutely not true. And I think that's a good starting point, because right after that, I started really thinking critically about mental health and what was going on with me. And that led me down a very interesting path through my spirituality, to a practice of spirituality, to an understanding of the world and the society that we live in that I did not have before, and to endless coping mechanisms, endless amounts of coping mechanisms that I didn't even think were,
Wow.
possible, I guess. Yeah, is the
Yeah.
right word.
When you talk about, so you talk about at 23, just thinking that having panic attacks and all this stuff was
Yeah.
normal. So how did you come across that and realize that what was going on and what you were experiencing was something else?
I think it was just like I had to. I'm very articulate. I love documenting things, and I love understanding things from an objective, kind of almost bird's eye view standpoint. And so I often was trying to explain my situation to people, and also keeping track of it, and being like, well, I come from a family of gaslighters. That's so a lot of anytime I had to defend myself, I had to be very articulate, very particular about what happened, because of course I'd be told it didn't happen, or that I
Mm-hmm.
was crazy or whatever. And so I became really good at being super articulate about things that were very hard to be articulate about, because if not, then I didn't have the community to go to talk to. And even then there were slim chances. And when I ended up, when my father passed, I ended up having to deal with a lot of things that weren't new, but were just kind of like exaggerated versions of things that I'd already been through. Like the panic was amplified, the grief was amplified, the anxiety was amplified, the confusion was amplified. And when I started describing what it was that I was feeling and going through to people, I started realizing like I didn't really even understand what I was talking about. And then, because people would be like, well, aren't you happy? Or are you sad? Are you grieving? I'd be like, no, I didn't know what I was talking about. So when I started thinking about it, I started going through what emotions were for me. And I think the first thing that tipped me off was like, I suddenly realized that all of my emotions were one singular emotion, just interpreted differently. And that really is one of the first understandings I came to that led me down the path to where I'm able to sit here and talk about it.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember when we had that conversation when we're talking on the phone and you brought up that point of, describing what you were feeling, describing what was happening during that time. And then kind of like you mentioned just there, not really fully understanding what you were even saying. And then coming to the conclusion of emotions. You described that in such an interesting way for me last time. You talked about, realizing that the emotions that you were feeling were, how did you put it? You put it a certain way. I can't I
Yeah, yeah,
can't
yeah.
say, yeah.
I came to the conclusion that we don't have emotions. What we consider to be emotion, what we're taught to view as emotion and treat as emotion from the day we're born, is actually a number of stimuli that correlate to your environment. Which
Wow.
is to say
Yeah.
that something's hot or cold, or something's dangerous or safe, or that you're hungry or full, or sad or happy. Sad or happy is a bit more convoluted than you actually think it might be, because there is no such thing as being happy. Like, what is happy? You find that happy can be broken down into many other things, like security, feeling safe, feeling full, not having that feeling of hunger when you're, maybe low on money and you can't afford groceries or things like that. And basically, we've been taught to interpret these, what are basically just gut instincts that are just suggestions from your body about the world around you.
Yeah.
We, instead of viewing it like
Yeah.
that, we're taught to view it as like, oh, well, I'm mad or I'm angry. Instead of being like, well, why am I angry? Well, I feel threatened by this. Why do I feel threatened by that? Because it's threatening maybe my security in my home, or my relationship, or my job, which I need my job so I can have a home and a relationship. And and you can see that these things really, they break apart real easily into
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
kind of just base stimuli. And that's the
Wow.
conclusion I came to. It took like 3 years, but
That's
that's not to
so
say I don't have
I've
emotions. I
That's
do.
so interesting. Like I've never heard that expressed in that way before, because when you really think about it, right? Like what you just said there, when you're younger and you're learning about, happiness, sadness, and like you
Yeah.
sit in your class and they're showing you the different faces of a smiley face, sad face, angry face, and we're taught these emotions. And sometimes, I can, thinking back from, being a kid, and, some of these emotions were like looked at as good. And these ones are looked
Yeah.
at as bad.
Yeah.
And if you're feeling this way, you need to try as hard as you can to get out of that and back into the good side. So
Right.
if you're feeling sad, bad, go back to the happy side. If you're feeling mad, not good, go back to this side. And it's almost like we're,
Yeah.
being taught that so young that it almost does make it very difficult and challenging to express what you're feeling when you are feeling sad, and you don't, maybe you don't even know what you're feeling. You're feeling something, but you don't know how to put that into
Yeah.
words, and you kind of feel afraid of trying to put that into words because you don't want to put it into the wrong words.
Well, I think it is a matter of vocabulary, because when
Yes.
we're because everybody's hesitant to say, well, I'm happy,
Hmm.
for example, because happiness is fleeting. And it's part of the American dream is like, you work hard so you're happy, you have a good family so you're happy. And so eventually what happens is, if you don't have a happy life, you go, well, it's happy anyways, and then you confuse yourself because you have to lie to yourself. And there's a big thing about that in meditation. It's the core tenet of any mindful meditation, or really any meditation in general, which is, you're not trying to silence your thoughts, you're trying to take a step away from them. It's a stream that's always flowing. There are eddies, there's a direction, maybe it turns back in on itself, but you're not ever able to stop it. And the thing I found with that tenet is that they don't describe why, really. In most practices, it's more just like a disengagement technique, is just viewing it as a stream and not as something that you're supposed to necessarily engage with.
Oh
And when
yeah.
I thought about it really, really deeply, I came to the same conclusion, which was, like, the reason it's a nonstop flow, almost equivalent to like a river or an ocean, is because it is. You have every single second, every fraction of a second, you're bringing in, like, dozens to 100 bits of information, and that's what it is. That's what that thing you're getting involved with is. It's a flow of data that you're not separating yourself from. And I think it's a vocabulary, right? It's like, well, if I take half that data and I go, well, what I'm experiencing is happiness, then suddenly you're talking about it as happiness. And then that obviously, like I said, leads you to the fallacy of believing that happiness is something, which allows you to then confuse yourself later when you have to lie to yourself about whether or not you're happy,
Wow, that
because those
also
things disappear.
that's so, oh my gosh. Wow, that reminds me of, I think we got into this a little bit last time, but about the happiness thing, right? Is like when we reach certain points in our life, right? We set these points,
Hmm.
and once we reach this,
Yeah.
then we'll be happy. But then what happens once you
Hmm.
reach that? Then there's another thing. Once I reach this,
There's always
once
more to
I'm
go,
and then
right?
right, so it's like,
Yeah.
when you really think about it, if the point is always moving, like you meet it, it's moving. If you and like it's always constantly shifting and going over here, going over there, how are you ever actually going to be able to experience happiness, maintain happiness, and
Yeah.
have that? And thinking about, something that you brought up that was last time we talked that has been super helpful to you was what you just said right there, was meditation. So
Hmm.
I would love to hear, like, when did you get into meditation and when did you start practicing it, and what differences have you noticed in your life because of doing meditation?
Oh, that's a great question. Huh. Well, I guess I'll try to reduce it to something more general, because there are obviously a lot of specific details, a lot of specificity in the way that it's affected me, and I'm not sure I could list all those right now. But the um, the practice of meditation came to me about 4 years ago, really, because I started doing it, and then I hadn't come to the understanding of what my emotions were and what my struggle was, or that I had anything wrong in the first place. And so it took me about a year. I did it a couple times, and I was like, well, this isn't really working for me, because it's hard to get your mind um, under control in a way where you let it have freedom, which
Oh
is like a
yeah.
weird contradictory thing. But at first it was like the hardest thing in the world, because I was in so much denial, and I was the degree of the uphill battle was at such a slant that it felt like I was never making any progress upwards. And then my father died, and I always say this, and people take it a certain way, and that's on them. But I felt a big weight lifted off my shoulders. There's a lot of expectation and pressure that comes off your shoulders when somebody's not around to put it there anymore, whether they mean to or not. And I'm not saying it was intentional or anything like that, but when I realized that I needed to think um, very seriously about what I was going through and what I was feeling, because when I realized that I wasn't feeling what I thought I was feeling, um, I started to look at that, and I had to peel back the layers of this kind of confusion, or um, absence of understanding, I guess, to realize like what emotions were, what I was feeling. And when I did that, things, we call them synchronicity, but serendipitous things started happening, where meditation almost kind of fell into my life. But then again, I was also looking for it, so it's a little bit of both. And then I basically just gone through periods of like intense practice, and then falling away from the practice so I can absorb more of life's lessons, and then
Yeah, yes.
go back into it with a different understanding. And so I'll have like periods where I do really serious meditation for about 2 or 3 months, and then I'll go 2 or 3 months, or sometimes 4 or 5, if it's a serious, uh, uh, time for learning, a time of evolution in myself. Um, I'll not do really any of it. I'll think heavily. I'll do like waking meditations where I'll be thinking all day, but I won't sit down with myself for an hour and go into the thoughts of it and
Wow.
whatnot.
That's so
And
cool. That's
yeah,
amazing.
and
Just
it's really, really hard. And the thing is like it's really, really hard, especially if you're sick, especially if you have something like borderline personality. And in fact, the people I've met who have BPD, or the forums I've looked at, or the research I've done on it, almost everybody's like, meditation's not good because you're naturally thinking in delusion. So it's not super healthy, because with BPD, the one of the big issues is that you convince yourself things are true when they're not true.
mhm.
And so if you don't have a good foundation, you can actually make your condition worse, because you'll sit
Yeah.
there and you'll ruminate on things you shouldn't be ruminating
Have
on.
you found something like that? So like when you talk about the foundation of that, so if you have,
Mhm.
borderline personality and you're doing meditation, and how do you, is there a way that something that you found of how to come away from that place of staying so much in that delusion and moving towards
Yeah.
is there something that you found that's like helpful in that?
Accountability is always good. I mean,
Okay.
because the thing is like when everything is said and done, you've got you, and that's it. So even if you have a partner or you have a family or you have good friends, at the end of the day, it's not like as serious and bleak as like, well, you're born alone and you die alone. It's more
Yeah.
like you're not always going to have people around who can keep you accountable in the way that's necessary. And so you're
Yeah.
responsible for yourself, even if you are sick. Because it's one thing to have an episode and be like, well, that's not my fault. I'm sick. I could do whatever I want. And
Right.
then be
Yes.
like, oh, yeah, you know what? I'm really sorry about that. I'm trying really hard on this thing. It might take some time. I just want you to know I didn't mean what I said, or I didn't mean what I did. Please be patient with me. And that's accountability. And then doing it different next time, no matter whether it's incrementally or wholesale. Because sometimes, like I get really loud in my fits, and I'll have to like stand still, and I'll just have to stand still until it goes away. That's still trying, and that's still being accountable for your actions. And I think when I went into it, I think I'm almost blessed by the fact that I came from a family full of denial and gaslighting and manipulation. Because one of my things when I started meditation was, well, one, I treated my BPD like depression because I thought I just had just clinical depression, which wasn't true. And then, so I kind of got lucky in that sense too, because I started treating it as something else. And thankfully, the treatment for the other thing actually helped the treatment for the thing I actually had.
Wow.
And then, so I got lucky. I wouldn't say that that's something everybody should do.
Yeah.
But then I also was like, I'm aware that I feel differently. And I started working on intention and what my intention was, what I wanted to do with my life. And I had spoken to you about like, my purpose as I see it is like learning these things so I can teach other people these things, and in a sense, liberate them through my experience. And
Yeah.
the only way to do that is to be honest and be accountable and have the right intention. I can't do it for something like money or fame or intrigue or anything like that. I have to do it because I want to help, but more importantly, because I want to help myself. I
Yeah.
always say
Oh
it's
yeah.
going inward and then outward. It's not going outward then inward. I can't help you, Paris, until I
Yes.
help me.
I love that so much. And that really
Yeah.
brings me back to something. So last time we spoke, you said something that I thought was so powerful and just really stood out to me. So I do this a lot. Like I'll write things down that people say in these conversations, and this is what you said. So I thought it was like I just really want to dive into this one because we were talking,
Mhm.
and you said to me, I am not a problem to be solved, but I have problems that need solving. And
Yeah.
I really love that. So I would love to ask you, like talk more about this and, what you meant by it. Cause I just thought the way you phrased that and put that was so eye opening.
Yeah. I mean, I was always kind of branded as the artistic kid who didn't want the normal job, who was ungrateful because I didn't want the normal job, who felt entitled because I thought the world owed me something. And I used to have these conversations with my mom where I was like, I don't understand why I have to pay taxes. Like, I don't understand why I have to go work 40 hours a week. I don't want to do it. Like, I didn't ask to be born, for one. So you had me, and now I pay taxes and go work a full-time job. And
Yeah.
I go to college and I hate it. And like, there was a big disagreement with myself in that. And it was always like, well, then you need to fix yourself because that's the way things are. And you just have to get used to doing things you don't want to do. And I was like, well, that's stupid because isn't it my life?
Yeah.
And so I kind of grew up with this, like on all sides, from my friends, my family, all these people, like as if I was the thing that needed to be fixed because my mindset was wrong. But I never felt that way, and it was very conflicting. And then, when I realized, when I started meditating and working on myself, working on intention and being aware of things, I call it intentional awareness and mindful meditation. Um, it kind of changed the way I looked at things, and I realized like, well, maybe the people saying things are wrong or saying that they are reluctant to do things or resistant to do things, maybe they aren't actually the people that are the problem. Like maybe it isn't a
Wow.
people problem. Maybe it's a psychological problem or a values problem. Because I also mentioned this was that I live by like three tenets, which is like my definitions of things, my relationships to those things that I define, and then my practice of keeping that definition in that relationship. Um, and I realized like instantly, like, wait, I'm not the problem. I have things that need to be solved, and those can be seen as problems or challenges. But one of those things is like, is it hard? Yes. But how do I not do the 40-hour work week and still maintain my writing and my music or my, even my leisurely time? Everybody needs time for themselves. Like,
I
why is
really
it
love
weird that I
I love
want to play
that.
video games,
Just I
or like
like
I want to take
yeah,
pictures of
right.
myself?
I just love the way you put that because,
Yeah.
for a lot of the times, just thinking back for my own self, like when I was a lot younger struggling with what I was dealing with, like I felt that way as well. I felt like
Yeah.
I was the problem, and there's nothing like anything outside of me or like going on inside of me that needs to be fixed. It's me. But I think that
Yeah.
that's so like just the awareness of that the fact that you have gained that and you're able to help other people through that and through your story, through the documentary, which we're going to be getting into soon because I'm super, super excited to dive into that. But I like the way you lay that out there is, you are not, yes, you may be struggling with something. Yes, there may be challenges. Yes, there may have
Yeah.
been trauma, pain, loss, grief, whatever that may be, like whatever these emotions, feelings, things are that are feeling difficult, problematic, and unable to come out of, it's not like you. And I think that's the difference
Yeah.
of, when we personalize these things, because I had this conversation related to failure with somebody else, like another guy I was talking with was another podcast guest of mine, Dean Fox, was telling me, personalizing failure, right? So having a business that went
Yeah.
bankrupt and saying,
Yeah.
I'm a failure. My business was an
Yeah.
I am. So when
Yeah.
we personalize these things, right? And like say you have it like a diagnosis or not, say you've been hospitalized or not, or whatever the situation may be, but when you look at that experience and say, wow, I'm the problem because I had this experience or I struggle with this, it's
Yeah.
me. And I feel like that's a lot harder to come out of because
Oh,
you don't
well,
see a,
it's
a
conditioning,
possibility. Yes.
right? Well, you don't even see
Yes.
the shackles that you have because
Yeah.
it's so in your face that you don't even see it,
Mm-hmm.
or it's so normal that you're not seeing it that way. Because I mean, look at an abusive relationship, for example. You don't think you're an abusive relationship, especially if your intention is to help that person. You don't think that, well, they don't have to be accountable because they're sick and they're allowed to do that. Of course they're allowed to treat me that way because I said this or I did that. And it's like, no, like, no, there's definitely something wrong with it. But when you take a step aside, like with intention, and in a lot of ways, like in an abusive relationship, you can have friends that are outside and they go, wait, I saw this whole thing happen. That's not cool. Well, that's the same thing with intention. So like, even if, I love that story because I was just talking to somebody about success, one of my friends, and they were like, I don't feel very successful. And I was like, well, do you base your success on quality or quantity? And also, like, how able are you, I didn't say this part to them, but how able are you to like um to see the things that you did get out of the situation? So like, if your intention is to go in, like for me, like with anything like my EP, my movie, any of the things that I do in these podcasts and interviews and stuff like that, like if my intention was to get all of the critical acclaim in the world, or to get realized, or to have people, huge amounts of viewers, then I would be a failure. I'd be a horrible failure. Everything I did would be, rotten and horrible. But that's not the point. The intention was to help whoever stumbles across it or whoever's drawn to it by intention. And my
Yes.
intention is to
Mhm.
help little by little, not all at once. And so, they all do add up. And I'm
Oh
sure if I
yeah.
took an
Oh yeah.
accumulative like look at the views or the interactions on all the platforms, with all the interviews and podcasts, all of the media I've put out, it would be substantial.
Oh
Because even if
yeah.
it's
Oh
2,000
yeah.
people, it's still 2,000 people, right? So that's where intention helps with that. Is like, you go, well, okay, what was my intention? Because if it wasn't to be super famous and successful in a traditional sense, then what was it? And if it's not where I would want it to be, then what did I learn during that process? And
Oh
that
my
immediately
goodness.
strips all of
Yes.
that away, and that's hard. I'm not saying that's easy. That's not something you
Yeah. Oh
do,
yeah.
but
No, 100%. And that literally brings me to the point that you just brought up of like the intention of why are you doing the things you're doing, and doing it to help other people, right? And to reach
Yeah.
someone through communicating this message. And that brings me to the point of how, you know, you've been able to help people through releasing your film, A Chant. So I would
Yeah.
love to hear you get into this. Like, talk to me about it. Like, what is it about? What inspired you or led you to create the film?
Yeah. I think, and I'm not pointing fingers to like point out flaws, but I think you said documentary earlier on accident.
Yeah.
And,
Oh,
and
it's
yeah, but
document.
here's the thing. It is though. And that was so
Okay.
fun for me to hear. Cause I was like trying to calculate it in my mind of like, well, is it? And I was like, yeah, of course. Because, so the film is about paranoid schizophrenia, which recently, well, I guess 2013, but recently to normal people, because who knows to look for these things. There's a handbook that basically all the psychiatric professionals come to, and they revise
The
after a
DSM.
certain amount of time. The DSM,
DSM.
yeah. This one's DSM-5. So in DSM-4, schizophrenia, like many other illnesses, is broken up into stages or different types, subsets. It turns out that they actually revised this, and paranoid schizophrenia in 1985 was the correct way of thinking about it at the time, which is,
Oh,
so the
interesting.
work is based off a poem by Stephen King called Paranoid, A Chant. It's 100 lines. I adapted it and expanded it greatly, changed a little bit of the context so that I could make what I needed to make for myself. But it still follows the same, the poems in there. It's what the character's writing. It still is about paranoid schizophrenia. But the DSM-5, instead of designating it as a subset of a general illness, it describes it as a spectrum. So it's a sliding scale. There's paranoia is a part of schizophrenia. It's not a specific form of schizophrenia.
Hmm.
And so that's really interesting. And I want to put that out there because I don't think a lot of people know that. And
Oh, yeah.
it's good to know. But basically, I'm a huge Stephen King fan. I've read about 40 of his novels, and
Wow.
in a
Yeah.
3-year period from 2017 to 20, well, let's see, what's the year? 2021. So
2021.
yeah, there's
What year?
what year is it? So yeah, about 3 years of reading, and I've read some of his heftiest things, some of his smallest things, and I stumbled across the Skeleton Crew, which Paranoid a Chant was published in, and Will Patton read it, and then uh, a accompanying piece that came before it that was published separately called The Ballad of the Flexible Bullet, which was in Skeleton Crew as well, and it was read by Michael C. Hall. And so there are these really incredible performances, and the poem and that short story. I guess it's maybe closer to a novella, but they really touched me in a certain way where I felt very like I was very connected to it in the sense that I knew exactly what the characters are going through, which
Yes.
I found interesting because I was like, well, I think I'm pretty sane, you know, and all through my life, I've been a writer and an artist. And so when I show people my stuff, they're always like, whoa, how did you embrace that feeling? Like, how do you know what that's like? And I'm like, well, my little secret is that I deal with it all the time, you know, having BPD and dealing with panic disorder and dealing with, you know, these really intense things. I know what it's like to feel paranoid, to have hallucinations, to have schizophrenic tendencies, and which is something I struggled with my entire life. And so I saw that, and it just lingered with me. And then I had this idea to do as many short films as possible to kind of build up a directorial credit, because I decided to be a screenwriter and director way into my college career. And then I kind of let it go for a little bit. My dad died. And then I was like, I need something to do. And when I graduated, I had already written a draft of the script or two, and I kind of refined it, but it wasn't there yet. And then I moved to California and I worked on it even more while I revised some of my other work, while I tried to get into film and television. And then I decided I didn't want LA anymore. And because it's really not a healthy place to be in terms of industry. And I could see that, and I could see how it was affecting my best friend at the time, who moved out specifically with me to do that. And you know, he was like, I'm going home, I don't ever want to do this again.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I don't think I have to do it the way they're doing it. And I kind of saw it for what it was, and I realized like the lie of Hollywood. One of them is that you can't make anything in Hollywood without Hollywood as a back, like a spinal system. Like you can't
Yeah.
have it without it being the skeletal framework of what you're going to do with your life, which is total bullshit. You can crowdfund anything you want. You can do whatever you want, and that's what I did. And I crowdfunded my film, and I spent the next year and a half shooting it and editing it and being in post production. And then the pandemic hit. We went through 4 editors, and then I kept getting annoyed with the process. And like I said, synchronicity or serendipity, whichever one is more relatable to you or whoever's listening. That's what happened, and my life's filled with these kinds of meaningful coincidences. And I was like annoyed with the fact that it wasn't coming out, because it was something in my life that had happened so long ago, almost 3 years. It's 3 years ago, and
Wow.
I was like, I've moved on. I'm here now doing this, and I'm holding on to this part of my life that I didn't want forever. And
Yeah. Wow.
like probably the hardest part of my life. And the thing about this script I found was really important, and this is probably why it took so long, is that people needed to be in COVID for them to fully understand the film, because even people who don't have struggles with quote unquote mental illness the way I do, they're like, this is like being inside during COVID. This is like what it's
Yeah.
like seeing all of the government shit going on, all the
Yeah.
political stuff going on, and like not being able to go out into the world and like experience it. It's like being trapped in this room and like having these paranoid fantasies. And but the thing is like it's real. And so even people who aren't dealing with full-fledged illness or condition of any sort, they're like, they understand it. And it's very interesting to me. But the part about your comment on documentary, which is really interesting to me, the Freudian slip, was that it is a documentary, because I adapted it from the poem, and obviously there was the task of adapting work of somebody that I was a huge fan of, and I feel I understand on a very deep level, and making sure that it was accurate to them, not just, like, oh, I took a cool property and then, tried to make a big buck off of it. And in fact, I'm not monetizing this at all. It's all free. It's all, easy to access. And
Wow.
um, that was not the
Yeah.
intention. And I took my BPD experience and my grief experience and my experience of dealing with isolation and denial and all these things, and I put it into the script. So, um, the story goes that when I watched the final cut and I had time to sit away from it, I had time to like digest it, I realized how much of my struggle over the last 3 years, and 23 years before that, um, were, just injected into the script. And I feel like you can see all the markers of BPD attack and all the things of schizophrenia in there. You can see panic and dysphoria and all these things in it.
I
And
think that's like honestly the most
yeah,
beautiful part of that, of you taking like not only your own experiences, putting that into something where someone can watch that. And like you said, people watching it,
yeah,
during COVID, and being like, wow, this is, just like COVID, like this is, but then
yeah,
understanding underneath it all, that's like the experiences that real people have on a daily basis, and kind of like
yeah,
being able to educate people in that way, because that's something that I always find so interesting is, when I was younger, I did not have a clear understanding at all of mental illness, or
yeah,
I've heard about it. I've had conversations about it, but everything I heard was always very, very negative. So I didn't really I didn't really know what was going on. So I think that's always amazing when people put things out to show people like, hey, watch this, listen to this, this is like what it's like from this person's point of view perspective, so that way we
yeah,
can kind of educate people more and say like, this is what it's like to live with these experiences, and kind of give people just an idea of what a day to day looks like, and what is, and of course not to say like everyone who has borderline personality is this way, everyone who's bipolar is this
right.
way,
They
of
manifest
course.
differently.
Yeah, of course it varies, depending on like what it varies, right? So kind of just being able to give people something to hold on to and see and be like, wow, like, and walk away from that and say, now I feel like I have a better understanding of this. Now I feel like
Yeah,
I have learned something that I didn't know, because, there might be people out there, who are not don't really understand mental illness that much because maybe they haven't been
Oh,
exposed to it,
that's
right?
well, my
And
my lead in the film, I had a very long process of a couple months of rehearsals with Austin Gold, and he's now a really, really great friend of mine, and we're working on other things together, and we have a personal relationship, not just a work relationship, and he's great. But the thing is like when we started doing the work, he was like, so what's my intention here? Like, I'm fighting my brother. What's the intention? What am I feeling? What am I going? I'm like, you're not. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, yeah, you're schizophrenic. You don't have like say when you're sick and when you're not. You don't have a say when that's what mental illness is. You can be accountable and aware over time, but it takes time and it takes practice. And it's not something you can always put a cap on.
yeah,
And
yeah.
especially when you're really in it, like you almost have no control. It's almost like just a gut reaction. It's reactivity.
Hmm.
And for him, it was like, okay, but like, what am I thinking? I'm like, I don't know. What are you thinking? Like I have these moments where like he'd be super dazed afterwards, and like if you've ever been through any attack of any sort, whether you're bipolar, borderline,
Oh yeah,
anxiety, depression,
yeah,
any of that, it's entirely exhausting and draining. Like there's a core essence from you just gone, and um, he could not understand that, and it was really hard to explain it because I'm like, well, you have to be through it, and even today we talk about the fact that like he had to make himself almost personally incite these episodes while he was acting so that he could get it. And it wasn't until we started really shooting that he was like, oh, I get it. Like, oh, I understand. Because then afterwards he'd be like, I'm so tired, dude. I'm so exhausted. Because he always had to be at like 100, 110, always just like screaming and yelling and fighting and sleeping and all this stuff. And I was very clear, like, okay, so what you're gonna do is you're going to one, research mental illness, and then you're going to take on as many of those markers as you can. Any of those characteristics or attributes that you can find, kind of like almost like a walking phoenix doing Joker, which this was
oh
before,
yeah,
way before that movie. And we were sitting down, and I'd be like, okay, you're only sitting here, you're not getting up. And he'd be like, dude, I have to walk, like I have to move. I'm like, no, sit down, like you're going to stay here. I'm like, that's what it's like. And he's like, just like, kind of freaking out, but he was always willing to just like really throw himself into it. And I think if everybody were to be as willing to try and experience something somebody else was going through in that fashion.
yeah.
I mean, of course there's a
Wow.
very specific setting, but I wouldn't want everybody to go around having BPD attacks all the time.
Oh
Although I'm sure
yeah.
I think
No.
people do more than I think they do, but
Yeah.
I had to teach him. That, and and that's one of the things. Is like he called me up a couple of weeks ago and was like, "Hey, bro, like I'm sorry for calling you like random, but like, what's your like theory on like the spirituality stuff and like this meditation and like how do I practice it and like can I come over and like hang out with you and do it?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course." And so like if everybody were able to just take a second and like learn these things and like try to experience them or at least be open, then things like that would happen where they're like, hey, let me come spend the day with you and like learn something that only because of
Yeah.
your experience. And he's definitely changed because of it. So it's like it's a
Wow.
really cool
That's
thing.
awesome. That is
Yeah.
so, so cool. Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, I also agree with you on that point too, because sitting here thinking about this, I've had two panic attacks in my life. So I can
Oh
imagine,
wow.
how difficult that would be to try to like when you're especially doing a film, right? And trying to direct and then tell people like, this is, what you should be doing. And then they're like, wait,
Yeah.
why? Like, and they're trying to
I
understand
don't
it too. Like,
understand.
right. They're kind of
Yeah.
like they
Yeah, they
don't
are.
understand, but they're trying to. And it's like a struggle because even from like yourself, like it's like how do you tell people like how they should be acting because it's like and then you're kind of like trying to think back to something as a reference point like something that has
Yeah.
happened to you as a reference point of like, well, this is what it was like for me. And then also kind of that thing you brought up of the control part of it, because I totally
Yeah.
understand what you're talking about because just from my experience, right, when I had those panic attacks and, was hospitalized and looking back at that, reflecting on that and sitting there and thinking, wow, like how was I unable at that time in my life to control the way I was acting. Cause that was something I always struggled with being younger, you know, hearing, you know, my mom talk about her sister who was bipolar.
Yeah.
I was like, how do people just lose control? I'm like, how do they just not like
You're about to
know
find out.
how, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
like, how do you just not know how to like be quiet or act I guess like a socially acceptable way to be acting in public?
Yeah.
How do people just not know how to do that? How do they lose control? And then until it happened to me, and even now today, right now, sitting here trying to explain that, it's really hard for me because I
Yeah.
still don't know how to really like articulate that and say, well, you know, when this happened, this is why, you know, and to walk people through like step 1, step 2, this is it just was. And I'm like
Well,
trying to put that into something. It's like
with
very,
BPD, it's very interesting
yeah.
because when I looked it up, um, it was like reading an article written about me. And I was like, these people don't know who I am. And then I'm like, but I guess you don't need to because there are archetypes. Like, it's not to say that everybody with BPD will do the same thing, but it's to say that most likely there are going to be similar overlapping moments or behaviors or characteristics. And when I first learned about it, I was like, oh, okay. So basically, all my research is saying that it's not insanity, but it's not insanity. So I'm only crazy sometimes. And
Yeah.
I made the joke of like, well, I'm sometimes crazy, but so crazy or crazy so little of the time that there's really no label for me disease. So I was laughing about it. And then one of my friends who has BPD, they were like, yeah, that is a really confusing label, but because I was like, I don't have split personalities. And then they were like, yeah, but when you get into a certain level of distress, like when you're in an episode, you do forget who you are for a second, don't you? And I
Hmm.
was like, oh yeah. And they're like, that's the borderline part. And I was like, oh, so it's temporary. It's a temporary madness that ejects you from your sense of self.
Wow.
Totally. And that was something that kind of was like, it clicked for me. And I was like, oh yeah. And that's what it is, you know, and Amanda calls it splitting, which I love because it is.
Yes.
I feel one way and then I'll think totally different than the way I feel. Um, and that is called splitting because you're technically fighting with two halves of yourself that are completely
Hmm.
like opposite most of the time. And that's
Wow.
a physical pain. And so explaining that to people's hard because some people don't have that sense of identity that's
Yeah.
taken from
Yeah.
them. They will never have that. And that's great. But when you're trying to explain something or trying to get sympathy for something or empathy for something, it's like, okay, that's difficult. And like with my partner, a lot of my episodes result in like yelling. I'm very
Hmm.
loud, but I'm not yelling.
Yeah.
It's the only thing I can do at that time. And so a big thing that we have to deal with because my partner deals with their own things is like, I'm not yelling at you, but of course yelling also triggers many things for them
Oh
and
yeah.
for
Yeah.
everybody else because we've been trained to think that loud noises are bad,
Yeah.
uh, and that any kind of uh, breaching of a certain threshold of volume is a bad thing. But in the same way that we were talking about how emotions are one emotion, I was also talking to you about the fact that like if you took the context out, if you took the interpretation out, a lot of the times anger can look like excitement or happiness can look like
Yes.
sadness
I
and things like
remember
that.
that. You bringing
And
that up.
so
Oh my goodness.
yeah,
Yes.
so it's like a really interesting thing to talk about because yes, most people are conditioned to think that screaming is bad, but um, the hardest part for somebody with BPD who has shouting matches about things that they don't want to really yell about is the fact that like you just hurt this person and you just triggered them into something that you would never do on purpose and you can't take it back.
Hmm.
All you can do is be accountable and say, well, I'm sorry, I'm
Wow.
trying again.
Yes. Oh
Uh,
my gosh. I just love the
yeah,
way you break this down and explain it because it makes it honestly very very easy to understand, especially for like for people who don't know as much about this or these experiences, and they're trying to learn
yeah,
more. They're trying to understand it. So that kind of leads me to something that I would really love to ask you because I
yeah.
always find this question very interesting and like how what people say and like the responses. So if you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would you say and why?
Oh man. I think the only thing that really matters is the fact that nothing is real unless you
Yes.
make it real. Because I think a lot of this boils down to like somebody told you something and you believed them. And the thing is like even in really difficult situations, where that ideology or policy is widespread, it doesn't mean that it's real, and it doesn't mean that it's right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you see something like, again, the 40-hour work week, and you're like, but I don't feel comfortable working all the time. And I know that's not the way I work. I know I'll be fatigued. I know I'll break down. So how do people do it for their entire lives? Well, I think if you find people who aren't doing passion jobs, like running their own business or doing something in a field that they really truly love, um, you'll find that they don't do very well. And they lie about it. They're like, yeah, I'm doing fine. I love working my job. And then they're doing horrible. But they're not even aware of how horrible they're doing, so they can't even tell you how horrible they're doing. It's not that they're
Mm-hmm.
lying to you, it's just they don't know what to say. And that's something I would tell myself is like, nothing is true
I think that's
unless you
amazing.
make it
Just the
true.
fact of, like what you said right there is nothing is real unless we make it so. Because if like that kind of brings me back to this whole point of, when you think a certain way for so long and for so many,
Yeah,
so many, so many years, it's very hard to change that and to come out of that and
it
to like really
is.
transition. Like if you're trying to, like take better care of yourself physically and just, you feel like something is wrong and you're dealing with something, you're struggling with something, but you don't know how to get out of it. And you feel like, all right, I just got to stay here. I think that is such a great piece of advice to have, because we really do create our own realities. Because
We do,
like you said,
100%.
things that are told, we hear, we absorb, we digest, we take in, and we believe this to be, this is the only way it can be. Just that, incredible, incredible,
It,
incredible. This whole conversation, like, I've just really enjoyed, being able to connect with you and just hear your story, hear your experiences, not only with, BPD, borderline, and just like the whole thing you put together with this film and putting this out there, and just and what you're doing to really help people have a better understanding of what these things are, what they look like, what they mean, how they affect people, I think is just incredible. The work you've done is so, so needed and so necessary, and is definitely making an impact and definitely helping people, of all kinds of things, right? People who are struggling, people who have struggled, people who have never struggled with their mental health in particular, but maybe just want to have a better understanding. And that's why I was really glad, just to like virtually sit down with you and have this conversation out here on Crooked Illness, and, really bring this out and just, let people know, where can they find your film, A Chant? YouTube? Like, let them know. Where can we find
yeah,
this?
it's on YouTube. It's just my name.
Yes.
I think it's if you go to channels and you
Okay.
just type in my name, or if
Yes.
you filter it to channels, you'll find it. Even if you just type it into the search and then
Oh my
go
gosh.
down the list.
Awesome.
But yeah,
Yes.
that's it.
Oh my gosh. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for, jumping on that call with me, being able to record this today. I'm so excited to release this episode. And, just for everyone listening, you guys, whether this is like the morning or nighttime, whatever time of day it is, I hope that you guys have a great rest of your day, great rest of your week. And I hope that you have enjoyed listening to this conversation as much as I have enjoyed taking part in this conversation. And on that note, I'm going to end it here and say goodbye to you guys. And also goodbye to my incredible guest, Jamie. Bye, Jamie.
Bye. Thanks for having me.